Hi, I'm Zach Jeffries and welcome to Saskatoon in Focus, the program where we talk to the people in and behind the headlines who make Saskatoon the city that it is today. Today it's my pleasure to have Sean Shaw, who is the president of Saskatoon Cycles, joining us. Welcome to the program, Sean.
Thanks for having me.
So Saskatoon Cycles, I mean, from the name it would obviously imply you're involved in cycling, but tell me more about what your organization does.
Yeah, Saskatoon Cycles is a local nonprofit that does cycling advocacy. Where we're primarily focused on getting safer and better infrastructure for cyclists.
Now, I understand that your organization is actually quite new in Saskatoon. How long have you been operating, and how has that time been so far?
Yeah, well, we were officially formed as a group in June of last year, so 1 year. We were officially incorporated as a nonprofit in February, so 1 year.
Great. So, in that last year, what have you found in the cycling community in Saskatoon? Obviously, there was a need or a want for an organization like this among people who do cycle. And what have you achieved so far?
Well, to date, we've got over 600 members who've signed up through our website to be represented by Saskatoon Cycles. We've put on one event called the Ice Cycle this past January, where it was -40. We had 200 cyclists out doing a bike parade on a Sunday afternoon through downtown Saskatoon. And we're just about to have our Sun Cycle, which is the much warmer version of the Ice Cycle. It's going to be a cycling festival on June 12th at the Farmers Market.
Excellent. So you mentioned that 200 people came out in 40 below weather to cycle in a parade around Saskatoon. I think that says something about the people in the city who actually get out there and do cycle all year round. I'm not one of those people, but I see them outside in the winter all the time. So from your perspective, how many people do we have in the city doing that all year round cycling and using that as their primary mode of transportation?
Well, officially Stats Canada in 2006 ranked Saskatoon as number 2 in Canada at about 2.5% of our total population cycles year round. And that's second only to Victoria, and that's quite the difference in temperature. So. And a lot of people would probably say there's more than that 2.5% that are cycling year round, but that's the numbers. So.
Great. So with all that considered, we have a lot of people doing this compared to other Canadian cities. We hear a lot of discussion, especially around the last budget period here in Saskatoon, that cycling infrastructure, according to your organization, is not where it should be. Tell me a bit about that, where you think it is currently and where it needs to go.
Yeah, well, you know, I think we're on the right track in the city. We've done some bike sharrows and bike lanes where it's painted lines that give a little bit of separation between bikes and cars. But in the last budget, the 2011 budget, there was officially $75,000 put towards cycling infrastructure. Now City Council will say there is a couple $1 million that they didn't spend the year before that's included in this year. But that's out of a total transportation budget of $200 million. So we're talking of, you know, way less than 1% of the total budget going to cycling. So, you know, we're on our way. We've acknowledged, I think, in the city that cycling is important, but now we just sort of have to get to that point where we're actually going to invest in better infrastructure.
So, but with the obviously greater than other cities, but all things considered, the number of people who do cycle is relatively small. Wouldn't it make sense that the amount of infrastructure dollars going into cycling is going to be relatively small compared to roads, freeways, and average city streets? Oh,
I would agree. I don't think anyone in Saskatoon Cycles realistically thinks that we're going to see, you know, $100 million going to cycling in a couple years. But, you know, if we look at the statistics, when we have 2.5% of people who are cycling year round, and the number is much larger when we get into warmer weather between April and November, you know, putting in 0.003, or I forget the percentage, $75,000 in 1 year, it is really insignificant when it comes to an investment in making it safer for people to cycle in the city.
So if your dream came true and the city significantly upped their funding for cycling infrastructure in Saskatoon, how would you see that specifically? Would that be additional bike lanes? Would it be certain types of other lanes painted? How would this actually impact, and what would it look like to the average Saskatoon resident?
Yeah, well, the Saskatoon already has a cycling plan on the books. There is actually a bike map produced. What we'd like to see is just you know, different infrastructure put in place that could be separated bike lanes are a really good thing on busier streets to put the physical separation between bikes and cars. But that can also involve on slower streets an idea of called bike boulevards, where basically the bikes are made a little bit more important than the cars. The cars are still allowed on there, as are pedestrians, but just slows traffic down a bit and makes it safer for cyclists. So I don't think there's one solution for Saskatoon. I'm not going to say it should all be separated bike lanes or all one thing or another. It's sort of picking what's best for the areas, but we have to start having that conversation.
So talking before the program, you mentioned that Saskatoon Cycles isn't just about advocating for additional funding for biking here in Saskatoon from the city, that it's also about education. And can you tell me a little bit about that? I know that when I cycle, I find that I can't stand motorists, and when I'm a motorist, I often can't stand cyclists, and there seems to be a disconnect there about the way that people understand everyone's role and the way the road should be used.
Yeah. Well, I think everyone should remember that most cyclists are also drivers. I'm a driver and a cyclist. And we recognize that in Saskatoon Cycles, and we are trying to do a little bit more around education. We recently took part with the Saskatoon Police in producing a video of cycling safety. At our Sun Cycle, we'll have a number of safety-oriented displays and events for people to take part in there as well. So it is important to get cyclists being aware of the drivers and drivers being aware of cyclists a little bit better in the city.
And does that actually does that start young? Are you trying to target younger people and do those type of advocacy things with them? Because I think that definitely is the case where I do see kids without helmets or those rules not being followed, and I think that probably would get worse over time if that's not properly dealt with.
I think so. That's the ultimate goal of Saskatoon Cycles is to get all age demographics. We're only a year old, so we haven't got those specific programs in place, but we have had those discussions. And ultimately, the better we educate the city of Saskatoon cyclists and motorists, the safer it will be for everyone on the streets.
So if you came up to someone who doesn't currently cycle, you're a big cyclist yourself, what would you tell them? Why get out there and cycle? Why try to use that as your primary mode of transportation? It seems to me it's, for some people, just kind of inconvenient. It's hard to carry work files with you if you're going to work, or you're sweaty by the time you get to the place you need to be. How would you sell that to someone?
Well, I would say I work in an office environment where I'm wearing a suit and tie most days. But I do bike to work. I'll put my clothes either in my office or I'll have them in my backpack. It helps when your employer provides the ability for you to change and clean up a little bit if you've had a particular hard cycle. But the reason I would suggest people do it is it gets you active. My 20-minute bike ride to work in the morning really gets me awake and invigorated, and it gets me going for the day. And then you've got that nice 20-minute bike ride home, and you get to unwind from your work. So it's good mentally and it's good for you physically. The other, in a lot of cases, if depending on where you live and how the bike routes are in your area, it's sometimes quicker to get home from work through bike as well. So.
Great. So you mentioned specifically, we kind of touched on this, about the Sun Cycle event coming up actually this weekend. Can you tell me more about that? Exactly when it will be, where it will be, etc.
The first ever Saskatoon Sun Cycle, which is a cycling festival, is being held this Sunday, June 12th, from noon to 4 p.m. at the Farmers Market. And it's geared to anyone from 8 to 80 years old. A lot of hands-on activities. So, we encourage people to bring down their families. We'll have arts and crafts for kids, decorate your bike. We'll have the police there. They're doing a large safety seminar where kids can get right out on the road with the police officers on their bikes, going through a little course of how to ride on the street safely. And we'll have a number of our local bike shops there offering free repairs for bikes and seminars on how to do those minor fixes to your bikes as well. So. Great.
Well, that sounds like a lot of fun. Hopefully the weather does cooperate and it is a sun cycle and not a rain cycle.
Yeah, here's hoping.
And that's all the time that we have for Saskatoon in Focus today. Thanks for joining us, Sean. Really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks again for joining us here on Saskatoon in Focus. I'm Zach Jeffries. Please make sure you connect with us. This is your program, and we can only be successful if we get your feedback. Find us on Twitter, on Facebook, check out our website, saskatooninfocus.ca, or send us an email, saskatooninfocus@gmail.com. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next week.